Finance Minister Grant Robertson has just announced the reappointment of Adrian Orr as Reserve Bank Governor for another 5-year term, but not everyone is happy. I'm joined by ACT Leader David Seymour. So you've got concerns about this appointment?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, the last 5 years has shown poor leadership, poor focus and poor outcomes from the Reserve Bank under Adrian Orr's leadership. And let me just give you a few examples. Massive staff turnover. They wouldn't take responsibility for it. He denied that he had lost 10 out of 26 of their senior management in the morning, put out a press release in the afternoon conceding that's exactly what had happened. That was at the end of last year before the Select Committee. The poor focus is that we've had all sorts of weird and wonderful objectives. For example, going to the central bankers' summer meeting saying why we embrace Te Ao Māori. Meanwhile, the outcomes are such that inflation is out of control. The large-scale asset purchase program was a massive overshoot, as was the cut to the OCR, and we now have enormous inflation that is mostly affecting Maori, people without many assets who are made poorer by inflation.
But is that all his responsibility in the sense that, I mean, in his statement, Grant Robertson makes the point that there's been a lot of reform of the Reserve Bank that's been driven by the government in terms of, and that's led to cultural change. And so, you know, is it been that because of that shift, for instance, staff left? And on monetary policy, I guess, you know, was this Reserve Bank that much out of kilter with other central banks around the world?
Well, first of all, let's just deal with those one at a time. The government certainly has changed the Reserve Bank Act and the structure and the governance of it, but that doesn't mean that they can't run a tight ship. It doesn't mean you lose 40% of your senior managers, deny it in the morning, admit it in the afternoon. That's a real leadership problem, and there's no shortage of anecdotal speculation about why that is. I think when your former 2IC decides to go rogue and start briefing people, all is not rosy, you know that you've got a leadership problem. So, yep, there's been some change forced by the government, but it doesn't explain that behaviour. Second of all, yep, other countries have a problem with monetary policy and inflation, no question. But our goal is not to say, well, we're about average, that's fine. Our question is to demand the best performance. And what we have is a Reserve Bank that totally abandoned orthodoxy, that tried to stimulate the economy, massively overcooked it, and has led to a cost of living crisis that is affecting people and will potentially destabilise the economy and crash the housing market at a level that you wouldn't believe. And it's not as though this wasn't foreseen. I asked Adrian Orr in Select Committee back in May, I think it was, 2020, if you do this, are you not going to inflate asset prices, increase inequality and create financial instability and ultimately inflation? And he said, well, yes, but the alternative is everyone will lose their jobs. Well, guess what? Now we've got a massively overheated economy with not enough people. So I guess he was right in one sense, but his job is actually to get the figures right. It's not to overshoot. And unfortunately, when your modus operandi is characterised by hubris, that's exactly what you do.
But, I mean, it's always easier, though, isn't it, in retrospect? Because previous Reserve Bank governors haven't got it exactly right either. I mean, because they are always trying to look ahead 2 or 3 years.
Well, you're right, but at this instance, have we seen any humility? No, we haven't, and that's what really sets Adrian Orr apart. You haven't seen a concession of, well, yes, we made some mistakes, we shouldn't have done that. It's all, well, we did the best thing at the time and you should be grateful. We can't learn in that environment. That is an environment of defensiveness rather than saying, well, actually, maybe we do need a more orthodox approach to monetary policy in these kind of crises.
I mean, the comment about humility, because both, I guess, the criticism from both ACT and National has got very, very sharp. Is it quite personal?
No, I don't think it's personal. It is simply looking out for people who are now facing rising prices and rising mortgage rates at the same time, because we have a Reserve Bank governor who was blasé about inflation. He thought as long as he was stimulating the economy monetary with additional cash sloshing around, everything would be okay. We've got a guy who goes off and gives speeches about why we embrace Te Ao Māori without looking after price stability, which is what Maori people actually need. You've got to criticise that. People think it's personal, well, I think that's unreasonable. I think it is a personal criticism that the guy engages in a lot of hubris and doesn't show humility. But again, if that's personal, I guess fair enough. But actually, you do have to call that out.
But what about, the fact, in terms of monetary policy, it is now a monetary policy committee that's determining that. Does Adrian Orr take all the responsibility for that?
Well, you're certainly correct that he's been somewhat hamstrung, but he's also told us on every occasion, and I've asked him about this explicitly, has the change in the decision-making structure affected your decision? He said, no, it hasn't. It's been totally unanimous. So if he was saying, look, actually, to be honest, there is a healthy debate and there's different people have different views, then you might say, okay, maybe he was on one side of that and they were on the other. That's not the case.
And what do you make of the timing of the announcement, given that in 2 days' time the bank's releasing its review of monetary policy?
Unbelievably cynical. We should have a Reserve Bank governor fronting to Parliament in a couple of days saying, actually, here's why I deserve to keep my job. Instead, the examination of the last 5 years of monetary policy is going to be, here's why I kept my job, we won, you lost, eat that. You can see it already, and that's not the kind of learning culture and environment that a small island nation trying to make its way in the world requires.
If there's a change of government next year, which on polls seems likely, would you be pushing to, is there any way that you could actually...
Well, first of all, whatever the cost, we may find that it's cheaper for New Zealand to get a new governor than keep Adrian Orr. Second of all, there's a lot of other things that you've alluded to that do need to change. First of all, get rid of the dual mandate, back to inflation fighting and price stability as the only objective of monetary policy for the Reserve Bank. Number two, the monetary policy remit has become unbelievably waffly. If you look at the first policy targets agreement, as they used to be called, from Minister Cagle to Governor Don Brash, it said get inflation down to 0 to 2 by the fourth quarter of 1992, otherwise we will review your position and you're probably sacked. Now it says get inflation under control in the medium term. Well, I asked the Prime Minister what medium term means and she couldn't tell Parliament what medium term means, so how is it possible for the government to hold him accountable? And the next government, if there is a change next year, will put in place very specific goals for the monetary policy remit, and if he doesn't meet them, it's time to get someone who can. That's how monetary policy should work, not embracing te ao Māori.
If you're in government, could you work with him as Reserve Bank governor?
I think it'd be very, very challenging, but of course we have to be professional because there's so much at stake. The instruments we would have at our disposal is first of all Parliament to tighten up the legislation, and then within that legislation a monetary policy remit that makes specific requirements. We have had the experiment of taking our eye off price stability, and it is hurting New Zealanders up and down this country right now. That experiment needs to stop. We need to return to price stability. We need a Reserve Bank that is focused on the things that it can change and is held accountable for changing them, not a Reserve Bank that goes around saying, I am Tāne Mahuta. Give us a break. This is making New Zealand something of a laughingstock internationally.
David Seymour, thank you for your time.